Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, The Unexpected Invitation. Hercule Poirot, that most fastidious of Belgian detectives, was enjoying the rare indulgence of a quiet morning in his London flat. The air was redolent with the comforting aroma of freshly brewed tea, the steam curling in delicate spirals above the china cup. He had seated himself with impeccable posture, his legs crossed at the ankle, and was contemplating, with profound satisfaction, the exact angle of his silver moustaches in the morning light. A day without pressing matters was a rarity, and Poirot treasured it like a fine perfume, subtle, elegant, and fleeting. Yet the tranquility was abruptly disturbed by the arrival of a heavy envelope, cream-colored and sealed with wax of a deep crimson hue. It rested upon his desk with the air of importance reserved for documents that demanded attention. Poirot's eyes, sharp as the finest cut of crystal, immediately noted the handwriting, elegant, slightly flourished, almost archaic in its style. Every curve of the letters spoke of care, perhaps of nobility. Curiosity piqued, he broke the seal with precise dexterity, unfolding the letter. The message was brief, almost startling in its urgency. Monsieur Poirot, I require your assistance at Ravenhurst Manor, an estate on the Suffolk coast. A most troubling incident has occurred, and only your singular talents can unravel the truth. Your discretion is paramount. I entreat you to come at once. Lady Beatrice Wycliffe. Poirot placed a delicate fingertip to his chin, considering. The letter's wording was polite, but there was a subtle urgency, a tremor beneath the surface of civility. He did not read such things lightly. The phrasing, only your singular talents, suggested not mere confidence but a recognition of a complexity that others could not perceive. And the insistence on discretion hinted at matters of considerable delicacy. Poirot's grey cell stirred in quiet anticipation, as if awakened from a gentle slumber. Ah, mon Dieu, he murmured to himself, there is something most intriguing here. And indeed, intrigue is the very spice of life. With calm efficiency, he packed his belongings, a small leather case containing his magnifying glass, notebooks, and essential tools of observation, a set of evening clothes, and, of course, a selection of his meticulously maintained toiletries. Poirot always travelled with the assurance that he would arrive in perfect order, for disorder, he believed, was an affront to the mind and the senses. By early afternoon, Poirot was aboard the train heading eastward, the gentle rocking motion providing a rhythmic cadence that aided in his contemplation. He studied the countryside, noting the changing shades of green and gold, but it was the letter that occupied his thoughts. Who, he wondered, had sent it, and why? Lady Beatrice Wycliffe was evidently a woman of refinement and social standing. But refinement, he knew, often concealed complex motives. And the Suffolk coast, isolated as it was, suggested privacy, perhaps secrecy. Upon arrival at Ravenhurst Manor, the scene that greeted Poirot was exactly the type of environment to inspire both awe and unease. The manor rose from the rolling fields like a sentinel of another era, its ivy-clad walls a testament to the passage of centuries. The stone facade, weathered and dignified, glimmered faintly under the waning afternoon sun. Leafless trees framed the approach, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch with deliberate intent toward the gravel driveway. Even before entering, Poirot sensed the peculiar atmosphere of the house, a tension in the air, an anticipation that made the hairs along his neck prick ever so slightly. Lady Beatrice herself met him at the door, her posture poised, her expression one of genteel concern. She was tall, with hair as silvery as Poirot's own moustaches, and eyes that suggested intelligence tempered by worry. She greeted him with an elegance that bespoke generations of carefully maintained manners, yet there was an undercurrent of urgency she could not quite conceal. Ah, Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice a careful mixture of relief and tension. I am grateful you have come so promptly. Please, come inside. There is much to discuss. As they passed through the grand hall, Poirot's eyes absorbed every detail, the patterned rug, the polished banister, the slight scuff marks on the parquet floor. Every object in a room, he reminded himself, tells a story if one knows how to read it. And already, the subtlest irregularities hinted at disturbance, a chair slightly misaligned, a faint smudge upon the floor, a faint scent of perfume that seemed out of place. Lady Beatrice led Poirot to the drawing-room, where the air seemed heavier, almost charged. It was there that he first saw the object of concern, a jewelled tiara, or rather, the absence of it. The cabinet in which it had been kept was locked, yet the tiara had vanished without a trace. There were no signs of forced entry. I assure you, Lady Beatrice said, her voice trembling slightly, no one has been able to find any clue as to how it could have disappeared. And yet it is gone, my family's heirloom, lost. Poirot observed carefully. The cabinet itself was exquisitely crafted, the glass spotless, the lock intact. He moved closer, examining the dust patterns, the hinges, and even the sheen of the wood. There were no fingerprints that matched the household staff, though there was a faint smudge at the corner of the glass, too high for a child, perhaps deliberate, perhaps accidental. Madam, he said gently, may I inquire as to who resides here in the house at present? Lady Beatrice gave a careful list, her son Edward, his wife, Margaret, a visiting cousin, Philip Fairchild, the loyal butler, Jameson, and a maid, Clara, whose nervous demeanour was evident even from the doorway. Poirot noted each individual's mannerisms, the way they carried themselves, the tension in their movements. Even the smallest gestures, the quick glance, the reluctant smile, were pieces of a puzzle only he could begin to assemble. Ah, madam, he said finally, seating himself with studied grace, there is a great deal more at work here than a mere theft. I see subtle tensions, hidden emotions, and perhaps, secret resentments. We shall proceed, but patience is required. The truth, like the finest wine, cannot be rushed. Lady Beatrice sighed, a mixture of relief and lingering worry. I am in your hands, Monsieur Poirot, she said. But please, find the tiara. It is more than a jewel, it is the symbol of our family's honor. Poirot's eyes twinkled with the promise of the challenge ahead. Madam, fear not. With method, observation, and attention to the smallest detail, we shall uncover the truth. Mon Dieu, how satisfying it is to see a mystery unfold, n'est-ce pas? As evening fell and the house settled into a tense quiet, Poirot retired to his room to prepare for the inquiries to come. He reflected upon the day's events with the precision of a watchmaker, the letter, the subtle hints of urgency, the peculiarities in the drawing-room, the behavior of the household. Each element, he knew, would play a crucial role in the revelation that was yet to come. And as the wind rose along the Suffolk coast, carrying the scent of sea and storm, Poirot felt the thrill of anticipation. Here, in the isolated grandeur of Ravenhurst Manor, the stage was set for a puzzle of intellect, observation, and subtle human psychology. And Hercule Poirot, with his little grey cells fully engaged, was ready to untangle it. Chapter 2: Arrival at Ravenhurst. The journey to Ravenhurst Manor had occupied nearly the entire afternoon, yet Hercule Poirot's mind had scarcely rested. The rhythm of the train, the passing countryside, and the occasional distant sea breeze had only served to sharpen his focus. He thought of Lady Beatrice Wycliffe, her urgent words etched into his memory, and of the absent tiara, a jewel of exquisite design and immeasurable significance. Even as the train approached the coast, Poirot remained quietly alert, observing the behavior of the few fellow passengers, noting the slight tremors of a hand, the tilt of a hat, or the tension in a shoulder. These were the details that others might overlook, yet to Poirot they were like glimmers of hidden light in a shadowed room. Upon arrival at the small station near Ravenhurst, Poirot was met by a carriage that awaited him with polished wheels and the discreet elegance appropriate to an English country estate. As the horse trotted along the winding lane leading to the manor, Poirot's eyes took in the surrounding landscape. The fields stretched out in green and gold, bordered by tall hedgerows. Gulls wheeled lazily over the coast in the distance, and the wind carried a faint tang of brine, mingling with the scent of damp earth. Then, through the haze of a slowly falling evening mist, Ravenhurst Manor appeared. Its stone walls, aged yet dignified, rose from the rolling land like a sentinel of a bygone age. Ivy clung stubbornly to the facade, twisting around the windows and climbing toward the turrets. The windows glowed faintly, reflecting the dying light, and long shadows stretched across the gravel drive. Poirot noted with satisfaction that the house, though grand, had the intimate atmosphere of a family home rather than a mere architectural monument. Yet the air about it carried a subtle tension, almost as if the manor itself were aware of the secrets held within. Lady Beatrice Wycliffe met him at the door. She was taller than Poirot had anticipated, with a slender figure draped in a gown of deep sapphire that complemented her silver hair. Her eyes, a clear grey, were intelligent and keen, though a shadow of worry lingered in their depths. She moved with the grace of someone accustomed to command, yet her expression betrayed an unspoken fear. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," she said, extending her hand with elegance. "I am relieved you have come. The household has been, how shall I say, disturbed, and your presence is a balm for both logic and conscience." Poirot inclined his head politely, his own posture the very model of studied grace. "Madam," he said, "it is both my duty and my delight to serve. Mise OUI, a mystery is like a garden, it must be carefully examined before it blooms into revelation." She led him through the great hall, where every detail seemed carefully preserved. Tapestries depicting hunting scenes lined the walls, the parquet floor shone with polish, marred only by slight scuff marks near the entrance, a detail Poirot filed away in his mind. The ceiling was high, and the chandeliers, though unlit at present, hinted at the grandeur of the house. Lady Beatrice moved with deliberate care, opening doors and guiding Poirot with an air of both hospitality and tension. "This way, monsieur," she said, leading him into the drawing-room. The room, while lavish, had a lived-in warmth, soft chairs, books stacked neatly on tables, and curtains drawn to temper the fading light. Yet Poirot's eyes were drawn immediately to the cabinet, or rather to its emptiness. "The tiara," Lady Beatrice said softly, following his gaze, "was here yesterday. Locked, as always. Yet today, it is gone. There is no sign of entry, and the locks remain intact. We are at a loss to understand it." Poirot approached the cabinet, noting the polished wood, the intricate lock, and the clear glass doors. He examined the dust patterns, the reflections in the glass, and the faintest marks that suggested disturbance. One corner bore a smudge, almost imperceptible unless viewed at the correct angle, as though someone had touched it with a gloved hand but inadvertently left a trace. "Ah, mon Dieu," Poirot murmured under his breath, "subtle, very subtle. A detail most would ignore. But not me. No, jamais." He straightened, turning to survey the room. There was more here than mere theft. There were emotions, tensions, and perhaps unspoken grievances lurking behind the genteel facade of polite society. Lady Beatrice then introduced the members of her household. Her son, Edward Wycliffe, was a tall, well-built man in his early 30s, with sharp features softened by a certain reserve. He greeted Poirot with polite deference, but Poirot noted the flicker of something behind his eyes, perhaps worry, perhaps irritation, or perhaps both. Margaret, Edward's wife, was a striking young woman, composed and elegant, yet her hands trembled imperceptibly when she extended them in greeting. Poirot observed her closely, noting the careful attention to her attire and the precise way she held herself, as if guarding some secret even from casual eyes. Philip Fairchild, a visiting cousin from London, appeared slightly out of place, his manner more relaxed than the others, almost casual to the point of irreverence. Poirot filed away a mental note. His presence, though legitimate, could be more than it seemed. The servants, too, were introduced: Jameson, the butler, a man of impeccable dress and quiet efficiency, though Poirot detected a slight stiffness in his posture, and Clara, the maid, whose nervous energy was almost tangible. Every individual, Poirot realized, had a story to tell, whether they knew it or not. After these introductions, Lady Beatrice invited Poirot to sit with her. "Monsieur," she said, "you must understand the tiara is more than a jewel. It is the symbol of our family, entrusted to each generation, yet believed to carry certain misfortunes. Some in the household are afraid, others angry. And yet none can explain how it has disappeared." Poirot leaned forward, hands clasped lightly, his keen eyes never leaving hers. "Madam, fear not. Objects, though material, are often only the surface of a deeper truth. People, their desires, their fears, their pride, these are far more revealing than any jewel. We must observe carefully, we must listen, we must attend to the smallest details. The truth will emerge." Lady Beatrice sighed, a mixture of relief and lingering concern. "I pray you are right, Monsieur Poirot. I fear that if this remains unresolved, it may harm more than our reputation. There is tension here that cannot be ignored." Poirot's lips curved in a subtle smile. "Ah, madam, that is precisely why I am here. The mind, like a delicate instrument, must be attuned to all vibrations. Your household has many chords, each vibrating with its own emotion. I shall listen, I shall watch, and I shall deduce." As evening descended upon Ravenhurst, the manor seemed to settle into an uneasy quiet. The wind whispered along the coast, stirring the branches of the ancient trees and rustling the ivy on the stone walls. Poirot retired to the guest chamber prepared for him, a room of understated elegance, and began to organize his thoughts, his tools, and his approach. He considered the house, the people, the subtle signs, the faint smudge on the cabinet, the tension in Edward's eyes, the tremor in Margaret's hands, the casual air of Philip, and the precise posture of Jameson. Even Clara's nervous movements were clues, pieces of a puzzle waiting to be assembled. And as he lay in the quiet of his room, Poirot felt that familiar thrill of anticipation. The little grey cells were awakening fully, preparing to untangle the threads of deceit, fear, and secrecy woven into Ravenhurst Manor. A challenge awaited, intricate and delicate, demanding both patience and precision. And Poirot, ever the master of method, would face it with elegance, observation, and unparalleled reasoning. Chapter 3: Subtle Clues and Hidden Motives. The following morning dawned pale and misty over Ravenhurst Manor. The air carried the faint brine of the nearby sea, mixed with the earthy scent of dew-laden grass. Hercule Poirot rose early, as was his custom, and after a meticulously measured breakfast of tea and buttered toast, he prepared to begin his investigation in earnest. Today, the manor was no longer a scene of polite anxiety, it had become a field of observation, a place where every gesture, every glance, every nuance could hold the key to understanding the disappearance of the tiara. Poirot began in the drawing room, moving with deliberate care. He examined the cabinet once more, crouching to inspect the dust on the lower shelves and the faint smudge in the corner of the glass. The fingerprints had been smudged, almost intentionally, as though to confuse anyone who might search for clues. Yet, Poirot noted, the smudge alone was itself a clue, an imperfect deception. The tiara had been removed with knowledge and subtlety, by someone careful and practiced, but also proud enough to leave a signature of their presence. He touched the edge of the cabinet lightly with a gloved hand, noting the alignment of the door and the precise angle of the hinges. The tiara had not simply been taken, it had been taken in a manner that required knowledge of the household's routines. Someone had known when the room would be empty and when the light would strike the cabinet just so. Poirot's little grey cells began to form a map of movements, not just of people, but of opportunity. Having inspected the cabinet, Poirot turned to the household members for interviews, beginning with Edward Wycliffe, the master of the house. Edward greeted him politely. Yet Poirot detected a slight tension in his jaw and a nervous flick of the eyes. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, "I assure you, I have no idea how this could have happened. The tiara has been in my family for generations, and I have always treated it with the utmost care." "Mais oui, monsieur," Poirot replied gently. "And yet, it is absent. Tell me, what were your movements yesterday afternoon? Every detail, however small, may illuminate our understanding." Edward recounted his day in careful detail, a meeting with a solicitor in the village, a brief walk along the coastal path, and then supper with his wife. Poirot listened, noting every pause, every inflection. A hesitation when mentioning the walk, a subtle change in tone when speaking of the solicitor, all were tiny ripples in the surface of a calm lake, yet signs of underlying currents. Next, Poirot spoke with Margaret, Edward's wife. She appeared composed, yet Poirot noticed her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them in front of her. "I was in the library most of the afternoon," she said softly, "reading letters from my mother. I did not leave the room except to prepare tea." Her voice was steady, yet Poirot's eyes caught the quick flicker of her gaze toward the drawing-room cabinet, almost as if she were testing herself, seeing whether her own eyes betrayed anything. Margaret's movements, her careful attention to propriety, suggested awareness and precision. Yet Poirot was not convinced of deceit. Rather, he saw in her a subtle anxiety, a fear of exposure, not necessarily of guilt, but of something unspoken, perhaps connected to family tensions. Philip Fairchild, the visiting cousin, offered a contrasting demeanor. Casual, relaxed, almost too confident, he spoke of his walks around the estate and his observations of the house's architecture. Yet Poirot noted the minute details of Philip's account. He mentioned the drawing room twice in passing, and lingered on descriptions of the cabinet's craftsmanship. It was as though he sought to demonstrate familiarity with something he had, in truth, not yet seen. A detail that would prove important, Poirot surmised, though its meaning would only reveal itself in time. The servants, too, were not without interest. Jameson, the butler, was courteous and composed, yet there was a rigidity in his posture that suggested unease. Poirot observed him as he moved about the room, the careful, deliberate way he dusted surfaces, the almost imperceptible glances toward the cabinet. Clara, the maid, was openly nervous, wringing her hands and speaking in hushed tones. I only do my duties, Monsieur Poirot," she said, avoiding direct eye contact. Yet the tremor in her voice and the quick, darting glances revealed that she knew more than she would admit. After completing these initial observations, Poirot turned his attention to the physical environment. He noted the patterns of sunlight through the tall windows, marking the angles and the times of day that the light would illuminate the cabinet. He examined the scuff marks on the floor, the slight misalignment of furniture, and even the faint perfume lingering in the air, an aroma not belonging to Lady Beatrice, yet faintly present in the drawing room. Each of these details formed a complex mosaic, a map of movements and intentions. Poirot also took note of psychological clues. Lady Beatrice had mentioned that the tiara was believed to carry misfortune. This belief, though perhaps superstitious, held influence over behavior. Fear could motivate action just as powerfully as desire. People, Poirot reflected, often act not in pursuit of the object itself, but in reaction to the emotions and expectations tied to it. He filed this insight carefully, aware that it might illuminate hidden motives and resentments within the household. As the morning progressed, Poirot continued his methodical inspection, taking small notes in his leather-bound notebook. He observed the positions of chairs, the alignment of rugs, and the arrangement of ornament on the mantelpiece. Each adjustment, however minor, was potentially meaningful, a signature of someone's habits, preferences, or recent actions. Poirot believed that nothing was insignificant, the world was a tapestry of clues, and the task of the detective was to see the pattern where others saw only disorder. During a brief break, Poirot wandered toward the library. It was a room filled with leather-bound volumes and the faint smell of old paper. He examined the shelves, the positioning of the books, and the presence of letters scattered on a desk. One envelope in particular caught his attention, unopened, addressed in a delicate hand, yet slightly stained as if handled carelessly. He opened it carefully, revealing correspondence hinting at old grievances within the family, arguments over inheritance, disputes over propriety, and tensions left unresolved for decades. Even as he read, Poirot's mind worked swiftly, connecting these historical tensions to the present disappearance. By mid-afternoon, Poirot had assembled a preliminary mental map of the household, each member's habits, routines, fears, and possible motives. He had not yet accused anyone, nor had he allowed any suspicion to harden prematurely. Instead, he observed, measured, and catalogued. It was a delicate balance, to see without influencing, to probe without revealing. Finally, he retired to a quiet corner of the drawing room, tea at hand, reflecting on the day's findings. The tiara had vanished, yet the absence was only a symptom. The true puzzle lay in the interplay of desire, fear, and secrecy among the household. Edward's tension, Margaret's subtle anxiety, Philip's careful casualness, Jameson's composure, and Clara's visible nervousness, all were pieces of a complex psychological tableau. Poirot sipped his tea thoughtfully. "Ah, mon Dieu," he murmured, "the mind is a most curious instrument. Each emotion, each gesture, each hesitation, these are the true jewels, hidden yet revealing. And if one observes carefully, one sees not only the act, but the motive behind it. Patience, 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 and the truth will emerge." Even as the mist thickened outside and the wind swept across the grounds of Ravenhurst Manor, Poirot felt the familiar thrill of anticipation. The stage was set. The players were present. And the little grey cells of Hercule Poirot were already at work, ready to untangle the intricate threads of human behaviour, subtle deception, and the mystery of the missing tiara. Chapter 4: A Disturbing Discovery. The morning light filtered dimly through the tall windows of Ravenhurst Manor, casting elongated shadows across the drawing-room floor. Hercule Poirot had risen with his customary punctuality, his silver moustaches perfectly combed and angled with meticulous precision. Today, he felt, the investigation demanded a particularly delicate touch. Each member of the household carried a secret, and each secret was a key waiting to be turned in the lock of truth. After a measured breakfast in the great dining hall, Poirot requested a brief walk with Lady Beatrice along the cliffs that bordered the estate. The wind whipped around them, carrying the briny tang of the sea and stirring the edges of Lady Beatrice's dark cloak. Her expression, though carefully composed, betrayed a trace of unease, a shadow that had not yet lifted since the tiara's disappearance. "Monsieur Poirot," she said quietly, "there is more to this than mere theft. I am certain of it. I have observed the household, and though none will admit it, there is tension, discord, and fear. I do not know which is stronger." Poirot nodded, absorbing the bracing air and the rhythm of the waves far below. "Ah, madam, fear is often more revealing than pride, more telling than anger. The mind is an instrument of delicate vibration. And when that vibration is disturbed, it may lead to action, or to concealment. We must observe both the action and the silence between actions." They returned to the manor, where Poirot decided to continue his methodical examination of the house itself. He moved through the rooms with measured steps, noting not only physical traces but psychological impressions. A chair slightly out of place, a faint scent of perfume that seemed foreign to the room, a rug subtly shifted, all these details were threads, part of the intricate web of human behavior that would ultimately reveal the truth. It was in the library, however, that Poirot made a discovery that promised to shift the course of the investigation. Hidden behind a row of tall bookshelves, he found a narrow compartment, cleverly concealed in the wall. It contained a bundle of letters, tied neatly with a faded ribbon. The handwriting was familiar in style, elegant and deliberate, yet the contents were far from innocuous. The letters revealed long-standing disputes within the Wycliffe family, disagreements over inheritance, subtle manipulations to control household decisions, and grievances that had been carefully suppressed in the polite veneer of family life. One letter hinted at resentment toward Edward's recent decisions regarding property and assets, and another alluded to a clandestine visit from a relative who had been unwelcomed yet tolerated. Each letter was a thread, revealing subtle tensions that might have festered for years, invisible to casual observation but potent enough to influence behavior. Poirot carefully catalogued the letters, noting each detail with precision. It was clear to him that the tiara's disappearance was not a mere act of opportunistic theft, it was entwined with emotion, history, and perhaps even vengeance. Returning to the drawing room, Poirot resumed his subtle observations of the household. Edward appeared frustrated but maintained a courteous exterior, speaking carefully and moving with the measured steps of a man accustomed to propriety. Margaret, on the other hand, displayed a quiet tension, her gestures small yet precise, as if every motion had been calculated to avoid drawing attention. Philip Fairchild wandered through the rooms with a casual air that belied the attentiveness with which he noted each detail, especially those relating to the tiara and its cabinet. Poirot also spent time observing the servants. Jameson, the butler, moved with an almost exaggerated precision, a manner that suggested he had something to prove, or perhaps something to hide. Clara, the maid, remained nervously fidgeting, wringing her hands and avoiding direct eye contact. Both, Poirot reflected, might possess information valuable to the case, though neither appeared directly culpable at this stage. By mid-afternoon, Poirot returned to the drawing-room cabinet once more. The faint smudge in the corner remained, a silent witness to some recent action. He noted, with keen satisfaction, that the angle of sunlight striking the glass revealed tiny scratches invisible at other times of day. These scratches, subtle yet telling, indicated that the tiara had been removed with care, yet not without leaving a trace, an imperfect signature of the perpetrator's hand. The day's tension escalated further that evening when a minor incident occurred in the kitchen. A small fire had been caused by a candle knocked over near the stove, producing smoke that set off a brief panic. Poirot observed the reactions closely, the staff acted efficiently, yet certain details struck him as deliberate misdirection. The fire had been small enough to control quickly, yet it created a distraction, drawing attention away from certain household movements. The incident seemed almost choreographed, designed to shift suspicion and create uncertainty. Poirot, of course, did not voice this observation immediately. He preferred to store it in the recesses of his mind, waiting for a pattern to emerge. Every act, even accidents, could hold significance, every gesture, whether conscious or not, was a potential clue. Later that evening, Poirot spoke privately with Lady Beatrice once more. He shared his observations, not as accusation but as insight. "Madam, the tiara is not merely lost, it has been moved with intention. Yet the intention is only half the story. It is the emotion behind the act, fear, resentment, pride, that illuminates the motive. We must watch closely, listen carefully, and measure all responses." Lady Beatrice nodded, her hands folded tightly in front of her. "I am beginning to see, Monsieur Poirot, that the problem is more than the tiara. There are fissures in the family, tensions I had hoped were long buried. And now, perhaps, they have found expression." Poirot's sharp eyes reflected a flicker of satisfaction, not at the family's misfortune, but at the clarity that his little grey cells were beginning to achieve. Each hidden compartment, each letter, each subtle gesture brought him closer to the truth. He sensed that the next days would demand patience, observation, and careful deduction, for the weave of deception was intricate and delicate. As he retired to his room that night, the wind rising along the cliffs and carrying the moan of distant waves, Poirot reflected upon the day's discoveries. The tiara was missing, yes, but the real mystery lay in the interconnections of desire, resentment, and fear within the household. The letters in the hidden compartment suggested that the act of taking the tiara was as much about asserting control, asserting pride, and responding to ancient grievances as it was about the jewel itself. Ah, mon Dieu, Poirot murmured to himself, what a tapestry of human emotion. Each thread, each stitch, each shadow of intent, it is exquisite. One must only watch with care. Pattern will reveal itself. Patience, patience. The truth is a delicate thing, and it must be uncovered with precision. Outside, the fog thickened, curling around the manor like a ghostly curtain. Inside, the household retired under an uneasy calm, unaware of how closely Poirot was observing, analyzing, and cataloguing each gesture, each glance, each subtle shift in demeanor. The stage was set, and the detective's mind worked tirelessly, untangling the web of secrets, lies, and hidden desires that had led to the disappearance of the precious tiara. By the end of the day, Poirot was convinced that the solution lay not only in observation of actions but in the careful reading of silences, hesitations, and the hidden history of Ravenhurst Manor. In such matters, he reflected, a jewel is only a jewel, but the human heart, with all its fears and ambitions, is the true mystery. Chapter 5: Red Herrings and Misleading Paths. The morning sun rose weakly over Ravenhurst Manor, casting a pale glow across the ivy-covered stone walls. The fog from the coast lingered in the gardens, curling among the hedges and the winding paths, lending the estate an air both picturesque and unnerving. Inside, Hercule Poirot, ever alert, moved among the household with the precision and quiet observation that had become his signature. Today promised to be a day of careful scrutiny. The house itself, its inhabitants, and the seemingly innocuous details all held the potential to reveal truth, or conceal it behind artful misdirection. Poirot began in the drawing room, revisiting the scene of the disappearance. He scrutinized the cabinet from every angle, noting the faint smudge in the corner, the alignment of the glass doors, and the minute scratches on the polished wood. Every detail, he reminded himself, was significant, even those that appeared inconsequential. Yet as he examined the room, a subtle unease settled over him. Certain disturbances were deliberate but meant to mislead, a classic trick of those who hoped to redirect suspicion. The tiara's removal had been clever, yes, but the subtle signs left behind were intended to confuse and misdirect anyone who sought the truth. Poirot's first interviews of the morning focused on the staff. Clara, the maid, was nervous as ever, wringing her hands and shifting her weight from foot to foot. "Monsieur Poirot," she stammered, I only do what I am told. I clean, I serve. I do not know of any secrets." Yet Poirot observed the way her eyes flicked toward the cabinet, her quick glance toward the corner of the room where the faint perfume lingered, and the hesitation in her voice. Small as these signs were, they suggested knowledge, or at the very least, awareness, beyond her stated duties. Jameson, the butler, presented a more composed facade. He moved efficiently, attending to minor household matters, yet Poirot's eyes detected something in the stiffness of his posture and the deliberate nature of his gestures. The man's meticulousness was beyond ordinary habit. It seemed almost calculated, as if each motion had been performed to reassure or to deflect suspicion. Poirot made a mental note to observe Jameson in informal interactions, when the rigidity might relax and reveal more than spoken words could. Edward Wycliffe, the master of the house, was next. He seemed more restless than usual, pacing briefly before sitting stiffly and replying to Poirot's questions with careful, controlled sentences. "I cannot imagine how anyone could have taken the tiara," he said, though his eyes betrayed a fleeting irritation. Poirot observed the tension behind the composure, the subtle sharpness in his gaze, and the small bite of the lip that occurred when he thought no one was watching. Here, too, was a trace of emotion, a crack in the veneer of calm civility. Margaret, Edward's wife, maintained her serene appearance, though Poirot noted that the trembling of her hands had not entirely disappeared since the previous day. She moved gracefully about the drawing room, adjusting cushions, smoothing fabrics, and arranging objects with care. Yet every movement seemed measured, deliberate, and precise, as though she feared revealing a secret. Poirot's eyes lingered on the faint discoloration of a glove, the careful positioning of a chair, and the slight scent of perfume, not her own, that seemed to accompany her. These details, he understood, could be either innocent or misleading. The challenge lay in determining which. Philip Fairchild, the visiting cousin, remained the most enigmatic. He appeared relaxed, even amused at times, and seemed unconcerned with the tension around him. Yet Poirot noted the frequency with which his eyes wandered to the cabinet, the subtle lifting of an eyebrow when the tiara was mentioned, and the almost imperceptible smile that crossed his lips when Edward's movements betrayed irritation. Philip's casual demeanor was itself a form of subtle misdirection, designed to conceal either knowledge or involvement, or merely to frustrate those who would investigate too closely. As the morning wore on, Poirot focused on the physical evidence. He returned to the library, inspecting the letters in the hidden compartment once more. Some contained grievances over inheritance, some hinted at resentments held against particular family members. Poirot noted the language, careful, restrained, yet charged with emotion. These were not random words, they were tools of psychological influence, shaping perceptions, guiding suspicions, and perhaps motivating action. Poirot also noted a curious detail on one of the letters, a faint trace of perfume, the same subtle scent that lingered in the drawing room. It was delicate, nearly imperceptible, yet unmistakable. The fragrance's presence suggested that the letter had been handled recently, and by someone who wished to leave only the faintest of marks, a signature, if one knew how to read it. Then came a development that threatened to shift the investigation entirely. Clara, the maid, approached Poirot with trembling hands, insisting that she had seen a shadow near the cabinet late the previous night. "I swear, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice quivering, "someone was there, but I could not see who. I thought it was only my imagination." Poirot listened carefully, weighing her words against the pattern of observations he had made so far. There were inconsistencies, the timing she mentioned conflicted slightly with the household schedule, yet the details of her account, the movement, the hesitation, the care taken not to disturb anything, matched the subtle traces he had already noted. Was Clara truthful, or was she offering a carefully crafted misdirection to protect herself, or someone else? Adding to the confusion, a letter supposedly revealing a secret admirer for Lady Beatrice was discovered on the mantelpiece, its contents hinting at hidden romantic intrigue. Yet Poirot, with his discerning eye, noted the handwriting was different from all other correspondence, the paper slightly thicker, the ink newer. The letter was a red herring, designed to distract attention from the real matter. Whoever placed it had hoped to exploit curiosity, yet had underestimated Poirot's ability to observe the subtleties that reveal truth. By late afternoon, Poirot had begun to see patterns emerging from the apparent chaos. The theft was deliberate, yet not a simple matter of greed. The psychological manipulation was as important as the object itself. Fear, resentment, and pride were all in play, shaping actions and influencing behavior. Each household member had motives, both overt and hidden, and each had reacted to the tiara's disappearance in a manner consistent with their character and emotional landscape. Yet the presence of red herrings complicated matters. Shadows seen by Clara, the mysterious letter on the mantelpiece, and Philip's casual attentiveness were designed to mislead, to obscure the path to truth. Poirot, however, remained patient. "Patience, patience," he murmured to himself. "The mind is the instrument, we must merely listen, watch, and wait for it to reveal its melody." In the evening, as the household gathered for dinner, Poirot observed the interactions with meticulous care. Edward's glances toward Margaret were sharp, almost accusatory. Margaret's responses were measured, careful to appear neutral. Philip's eyes moved quickly across the table, noting reactions and testing boundaries. Jameson served with impeccable precision, masking subtle tension, and Clara fidgeted slightly, avoiding the gaze of every observer. Each gesture, each flicker of expression, each carefully measured movement provided information. The little grey cells worked silently, cataloguing, analyzing, and interpreting. Poirot understood that the solution lay not only in actions but in the subtle psychology of the household, how each person perceived themselves, how they wished to be perceived by others, and how they manipulated both truth and deception. By the end of the day, Poirot had drawn several preliminary conclusions. The tiara's disappearance was a calculated act, intricately entwined with emotional and psychological factors. The red herrings were deliberate, intended to mislead anyone investigating the theft. And most importantly, he recognized that human behavior, the hesitation, the glance, the carefully controlled gestures, would ultimately reveal the perpetrator. As night fell over Ravenhurst Manor and the wind carried the distant roar of the sea, Poirot retired to his room, confident that he had begun to untangle the web of misdirection. Patience, he reminded himself, was essential. The house itself, the letters, the subtle scents, and the behavior of its inhabitants formed a complex puzzle. All that remained was to observe with care, to probe with discretion, and to wait for the threads to converge. And as he lay awake in the quiet of his room, Poirot allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The challenge was intricate, subtle, and human, a perfect stage for the little grey cells. The red herrings might mislead the inexperienced, but to him, they were only part of the design. The truth, intricate as a tapestry, would emerge, and when it did, nothing would remain hidden. Chapter 6: The Fragment of Truth. The morning at Ravenhurst Manor broke with a muted, grey light that seeped through the tall windows, lending the house an almost spectral calm. Hercule Poirot, awake before the household stirred, was already dressed and prepared, his silver moustaches perfectly arranged, his little grey cells whirring with anticipation. Today, he knew, the investigation would demand both subtlety and boldness. Something was about to surface, he could feel it in the rhythm of the manor, in the faint vibrations of tension that hung in every room. After a measured breakfast, Poirot began his rounds, returning to the drawing-room to inspect the cabinet once more. The faint smudge remained, as did the subtle scratches on the wood, an imperfection that had once again caught his keen attention. He crouched, observing the angle of the glass and the way sunlight played upon its surface. And then, in a moment of quiet observation, his eye caught a glint near the base of the cabinet, almost invisible unless one looked from a precise vantage. It was a small fragment, a single gemstone that had broken from the tiara. A ruby, barely the size of a pea, its facets catching the light like a miniature sun. Poirot's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. This fragment, though tiny, was a revelation. Whoever had removed the tiara had done so with care, yet carelessness, impatience, or nervousness had left this trace behind. It was subtle, almost dismissible, yet for Poirot it was a solid, tangible clue. He pocketed the fragment carefully, noting its exact location and orientation. "Ah, mon Dieu," he murmured, "the smallest thing may illuminate the greatest mystery. Even a fragment reveals character, intent, and haste." Poirot then called for Edward Wycliffe. "Monsieur, may I speak with you privately?" he asked. Edward, already tense from days of uncertainty, followed with visible trepidation. Poirot began gently, recounting the details of his observations without accusation, drawing Edward into reflection rather than defense. "Monsieur Wycliffe," Poirot said, "tell me, yesterday, when you left the drawing-room for your walk along the cliffs, did anyone enter the room? Was there any movement you noticed upon your return?" Edward paused, considering carefully. I do not believe so. The room was empty when I left, and when I returned, I noticed nothing unusual." But he hesitated, lips tightening. "I did see Clara near the cabinet in the evening, though she claimed she was tidying. I cannot say if it was relevant." Poirot observed the subtle shift in Edward's demeanor, the tightening of his jaw, the slight narrowing of the eyes, the faint frown lines deepening as he spoke. "Interesting," Poirot said softly. "You observed, yet perhaps did not question fully. Very well. Keep this in mind, observation alone, unaccompanied by interpretation, is only a shadow of truth. Poirot then turned to Margaret, inviting her to join him in the garden under the morning sun. As they walked along the gravel paths, Poirot spoke in gentle, probing tones. "Madam, tell me of your feelings when you first discovered the tiara was missing. Not only your words, but your emotions, your reactions, everything you noticed about others at that moment." Margaret hesitated, adjusting her gloves, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I was frightened, Monsieur Poirot," she admitted quietly. "The tiara, it is a symbol, yes, but also a part of our family history. I felt a strange sense of violation, as if someone had intruded not only upon the room but upon the trust of our household." "Ah," said Poirot, nodding slowly. "And whom did you notice first, in that moment? Where were their eyes, their hands, their gestures?" Margaret glanced down, her hands twisting slightly. "Edward, he looked concerned, of course, but perhaps also irritated. Philip seemed curious, almost amused. Clara appeared nervous. Her words, though simple, were rich in subtext, revealing patterns of perception that Poirot catalogued with precision. By mid-morning, Poirot returned indoors, calling the household together under the pretense of a discussion about the missing tiara. He began casually, inquiring about minor details of the previous day's events, and carefully observing responses. Subtle shifts in tone, the flicker of an eyebrow, the hesitation before a word, all were clues. It was during this session that Poirot discovered a new inconsistency. Philip Fairchild, in recounting his movements near the drawing room, mentioned that he had admired the cabinet from the doorway but had not approached it closely. Yet Poirot recalled having observed him lingering near the cabinet, his hands brushing against the edge in a way that suggested more than mere casual curiosity. The discrepancy was slight, yet telling. A minor lie, or a minor misdirection, but enough to focus attention. Poirot then excused himself briefly, returning with a tiny ruby fragment. He placed it carefully on the table. "Miss Amos," he said, "we have discovered a fragment of the tiara. A small piece, yes, but of great importance. It reveals that the tiara was handled, and perhaps handled hurriedly. It may also indicate someone inexperienced, or nervous, was present at the time." The household exchanged startled glances. Clara's hand trembled ever so slightly, Margaret's lips pressed together, Edward's gaze flicked toward Philip. Poirot observed these reactions, noting the subtle weight of guilt, fear, and anxiety pressing invisibly upon each individual. Then came a revelation from an unexpected quarter. Jameson, the butler, spoke quietly but with emphasis. "Monsieur Poirot, I did notice something yesterday evening. While arranging the drawing room before supper, I saw a faint reflection on the cabinet glass, a shadow, slight, fleeting, as if someone had been there and hurried away." His eyes were careful, controlled, yet Poirot saw the tension beneath the surface. "Excellent, Jameson," Poirot said gently. "That shadow corroborates other observations. We must consider opportunity, motive, and temperament. And most important, we must remember that the truth is often concealed in the smallest details, gestures, hesitations, and fragments, like this ruby." By late afternoon, Poirot had begun to assemble a more complete picture. The tiara's disappearance was not random, it had been carefully planned, executed with both knowledge of the household and awareness of human psychology. The fragment suggested haste, nervousness, or inexperience. Philip's misdirection, Edward's tension, Margaret's anxiety, and Clara's nervousness all formed a web of perception and misperception that Poirot began to untangle. Poirot retreated to the drawing room as evening approached, reflecting on the day's discoveries. The small ruby fragment, the inconsistencies in Philip's account, the observations of Jameson, and Margaret's subtle cues were all threads of a tapestry. Each suggested possible motives, hidden resentments, and the careful orchestration of deception. He realized, as he sipped his tea, that the critical element of the investigation lay in human behavior, how each member of the household interacted, how they perceived one another, and how they concealed both knowledge and emotion. The tiara, though central, was merely a catalyst. The true puzzle was the interplay of pride, fear, and desire among the Wycliffes and their guests. And so, as night fell over Ravenhurst Manor and the wind howled along the cliffs, Poirot prepared for the next phase of the investigation. Patience and observation would remain his tools, and the tiniest fragment, a ruby scarcely the size of a pea, had become his most valuable guide. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured to himself, how fascinating is the human mind. Even the smallest thing, a gesture, a word, a fragment, may illuminate the darkest secrets. Soon, very soon, all shall be revealed. Chapter 7, Shadows of Deception. The morning air at Ravenhurst Manor carried a chill, a reminder that winter's approach had begun to tighten its grip over the coastline. Mist rolled across the estate gardens, clinging to the hedges and curling around the twisted branches of ancient trees. Hercule Poirot, already dressed in his customary immaculate attire, walked with deliberate steps through the corridors of the manor, his mind fully engaged in the intricate web of observation he had begun weeks prior. Today, he knew, the crucial moment of revelation was approaching. The threads of human emotion, carefully tangled, were beginning to reveal their pattern. Poirot began in the drawing room once more, his eyes sweeping across the cabinet and the polished floor. The faint smudge and the minute scratches that had troubled him since his arrival were still present, subtle yet unmistakable. He crouched, adjusting his angle of observation, and noted a slight discrepancy in the placement of the velvet lining of the cabinet shelves. It was barely perceptible to the untrained eye, yet to Poirot, it spoke volumes. Whoever had handled the tiara had attempted to replace it, or at least cover traces, but the perfection of the substitution had faltered slightly. Lady Beatrice joined him shortly thereafter. Her expression was measured, but Poirot detected tension in the subtle lift of her brows and the slight quiver of her hands. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, "I cannot bear this suspense. Each day brings more uncertainty, and I fear that our household is fraying under the strain." Poirot inclined his head. "Madam, patience, as always, is essential. The truth is not found in haste, but in the meticulous observation of human behavior. Let us see what today may reveal." He began by observing the interactions among the household members during breakfast. Edward Wycliffe's movements were precise but rigid, his eyes constantly flitted toward Margaret and Philip. Margaret herself maintained a calm facade, yet Poirot noticed her glances toward the cabinet, lingering perhaps a second too long, as if measuring her own reaction and that of others. Philip, ever casual, seemed more restless than usual. His hand lingered near the edge of the table, his eyes darting subtly from one person to another. Poirot focused on Clara, the maid. Her nervous energy had not diminished. She fidgeted with her napkin, glanced repeatedly toward the servants' entrance, and avoided direct eye contact with everyone except Poirot. He observed her carefully, noting that her reactions were inconsistent with those of someone entirely innocent. The fear she displayed was compounded by something else, knowledge, perhaps, or complicity. By mid-morning, Poirot decided it was time to investigate the rooms once more, following his intuition rather than a strict schedule. He moved silently through the corridors, passing Edward's study, Margaret's boudoir, and Philip's guest room, cataloguing small disturbances, a slightly ajar drawer, a displaced rug, a faint scent of perfume that lingered just where it ought not to. Each subtle sign contributed to his understanding, revealing the careful choreography of someone attempting to conceal their actions while leaving enough traces to mislead a casual observer. It was in the servants' quarters that Poirot made a discovery that electrified his thoughts. A scrap of paper, discarded carelessly beneath a chair, bore the faintest pencil markings. He picked it up and examined it closely, a hastily drawn diagram, depicting the cabinet, the room layout, and a series of arrows indicating movement. The diagram was crude, yet unmistakable in intent. Someone had planned the removal of the tiara with deliberation and foresight. Poirot's lips curved in a subtle smile. This fragment, combined with the ruby he had previously discovered, now allowed him to construct a tentative sequence of events. Returning to the drawing room, Poirot began to assemble the household for discussion. "Miss Amos," he began, his tone gentle yet commanding, "the tiara's disappearance is no simple matter. We must consider opportunity, knowledge, and behavior. Each of you has reacted in a manner consistent with your character, but not all reactions are as they seem." He began with Philip, carefully observing his response. Philip maintained his casual air but failed to mask the flicker of unease that passed across his eyes when the tiara was mentioned. Poirot noted the almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw and the slight hesitation before speaking. "Monsieur Fairchild," Poirot said softly, "you spoke yesterday of admiring the cabinet from a distance. Yet observations indicate your proximity was closer. Can you explain this discrepancy?" Philip's eyes darted toward Edward, then Margaret, before settling on Poirot. I suppose I must have been mistaken," he said, though his voice betrayed a slight tremor. The subtle inconsistency, Poirot knew, was enough to suggest deliberate misdirection. Edward Wycliffe, meanwhile, displayed irritation beneath his composed exterior. His glances toward Margaret were sharp, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. Poirot observed this carefully, noting the interplay of pride, suspicion, and concern. "Monsieur Wycliffe," Poirot said, "your attention to the household is commendable, yet there is a tension present. Almost a protective instinct. Tell me, what do you feel must be safeguarded above all?" Edward's response was measured, but Poirot detected underlying anxiety. "The family's reputation," Edward replied. "And the integrity of our household. The tiara is symbolic, yes, but its absence affects more than the jewel itself." Margaret, seated quietly, finally spoke. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice calm yet edged with emotion, "I fear that the true loss is not the tiara, but the trust among us. Suspicion grows like a shadow, and it is this shadow, that worries me most." Her words, though gentle, carried weight, hinting at the emotional undercurrents that Poirot had been observing for days. Poirot considered each reaction carefully. The fragment of ruby, the crude diagram, the subtle behavioral cues, and the inconsistencies in accounts now formed a clearer pattern. He could sense the alignment of opportunity, motive, and temperament, and he began to narrow in on the person who had orchestrated the tiara's removal. Yet he knew, as always, that accusation must be precise, based upon evidence and human behavior, not conjecture. Later that afternoon, Poirot requested a private discussion with Jameson, the butler. The man's composure was remarkable, yet Poirot detected a slight hesitation in his response when asked about minor disturbances in the drawing room. "Monsieur Poirot," Jameson said, "I attend to my duties. I notice only what is necessary for the household's order." "Ah, yes, but even the smallest detail may betray the mind," Poirot replied, his tone gentle. "Tell me, did you observe any unusual behavior among the staff yesterday evening?" Jameson's eyes flickered briefly, and a subtle tightening of his lips suggested he was carefully weighing his words. "There was a minor incident near the cabinet. A shadow, as it were, fleeting. I cannot say more without certainty, monsieur." Poirot nodded, absorbing this confirmation. "Very well. Jameson. Patience, as always, is the key." As evening descended, the household gathered for tea, a tense air settling over the manor. Poirot observed interactions with meticulous care, Edward's guarded glances, Margaret's composed yet subtle anxiety, Philip's restless movements, Clara's nervous fidgeting, and Jameson's controlled efficiency. Each detail, each reaction, was a thread in the tapestry of truth. Finally, as the shadows lengthened and the wind howled along the cliffs, Poirot allowed himself a quiet reflection. The fragment of the tiara, the diagram, the behavioral inconsistencies, all pointed toward a single conclusion: the theft had been deliberate, psychologically intricate, and designed to mislead. One person had orchestrated events with knowledge of the household, awareness of human behavior, and a careful control of misdirection. Poirot retired to his room, the house quiet except for the distant roar of the sea. His little grey cells worked tirelessly, cataloguing each subtle cue, each gesture, each inconsistency. The climax of the investigation was near. he knew that in the coming hours, the final pieces would fall into place, and the truth would emerge in all its clarity. "Ah, mon Dieu," Poirot murmured to himself, "soon the mind shall be illuminated. Soon, the shadows of deception will vanish, and the light of truth shall shine upon Ravenhurst Manor. Patience, my friends, patience. All shall be revealed." Chapter 8: The Unravelling of the Secret. The morning light at Ravenhurst Manor was pale but clear, spilling across the corridors and the drawing room with an almost theatrical precision. Hercule Poirot, impeccably dressed as ever, moved through the house with calm authority, his keen eyes observing each detail with meticulous care. Today, he knew, the time had come to reveal the truth behind the disappearance of the Wycliffe tiara and to untangle the complex web of human behavior that had ensnared the household. Poirot assembled the household in the drawing room. Edward and Margaret Wycliffe sat side by side, their expressions polite but taut with curiosity. Philip Fairchild lounged with an air of casual interest, though Poirot's observant eye detected the slightest tension in his posture. The servants, Jameson and Clara, stood discreetly to the side, their own curiosity tinged with unease. Lady Beatrice observed from her chair near the window, the corners of her mouth pressed into a tight line. All eyes, knowingly or not, were fixed on Poirot, whose calm demeanour belied the storm of analysis he had conducted in the privacy of his room. "Miss Amos," Poirot began, his voice smooth and deliberate, "we are gathered here not merely to discuss a missing jewel, but to uncover the truth of human intention and the intricate interplay of fear, pride, and deception. The tiara, though valuable, is secondary to the actions it has inspired. Let us begin." Poirot held up the tiny ruby fragment he had discovered days before. "This," he said, "is a fragment of the missing tiara. Small, yes, but significant. It demonstrates that the tiara was handled, removed, and replaced with care, but also with haste, indicating nervousness or inexperience." He allowed the room to absorb the implication. "From this, we can conclude that the act was deliberate and psychologically informed, yet imperfect. And as with all imperfections, clues emerge." He turned first to Philip Fairchild. "Monsieur Fairchild, you have presented yourself as casual, almost amused by the unfolding events. Yet your words yesterday contained discrepancies. You claim to have admired the cabinet from a distance, yet observations reveal that you approached closer than you admitted. How do you explain this?" Philip's composure faltered for a fraction of a second, a twitch of an eyebrow, a tightening of the jaw. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, realizing that evasions would fail before Poirot's scrutiny. Poirot, noticing the hesitation, nodded silently and continued. "Edward Wycliffe, you displayed tension, concern, and subtle irritation, particularly when observing Margaret's reactions. Your emotions were understandable, yet they alone do not explain the tiara's disappearance. They do, however, illuminate the atmosphere within which the act occurred, a household governed as much by pride, fear, and long-standing grievances as by reason." Poirot allowed his gaze to linger on Margaret. "Madam, your anxiety, your careful gestures, your subtle glances toward the cabinet, all were signs of awareness. But awareness, without direct action, is not guilt. It is observation and perhaps fear of exposure of secrets yet unrevealed." Finally, Poirot turned to the servants. "Jameson, Clara, your vigilance has not gone unnoticed. Clara, your nervousness was amplified by what you knew or suspected. And Jameson, your controlled demeanor, while admirable, occasionally faltered when minor disturbances occurred. You, too, played your parts in this drama, whether intentionally or otherwise." A hush fell over the room. Poirot's calm demeanor and precise language created an atmosphere of anticipation. And then he spoke the words that would crystallize understanding. "Miss Amos, the tiara was removed by someone with knowledge of the household's habits, access to the room, and understanding of human perception. The act required planning, yet it left traces, a fragment, a diagram, a series of subtle inconsistencies. The person responsible did not merely steal a jewel, they sought to manipulate, to observe reactions, and to gauge human behavior." Poirot paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. "And yet," he continued, "the true intent was not theft for personal gain, but rather an assertion of control, a response to long-standing grievance and resentment. The person responsible sought to test the household, to observe its members under pressure, and to assert their own intellect and understanding of human psychology. He walked slowly around the room, his gaze sweeping across each individual. Monsieur Fairchild, your casual manner, your restlessness, your minor inconsistencies, all indicated observation. You manipulated appearances to suggest innocence while testing reactions. But the critical error, the smallest imperfection, was the fragment of the tiara itself and the diagram discovered in the servants' quarters. These items reveal both your planning and your haste, and they betray knowledge and movements that only someone in your position could possess. Philip's face paled, the casual mask finally slipping. He attempted to interject, but Poirot raised a hand, gentle yet firm. Do not attempt to speak, monsieur. Observation and careful deduction reveal the truth more clearly than words. You sought to assert dominance, to test the household, and to play a game of intellect with them. And yet, in doing so, you underestimated the subtlety of human observation and the capabilities of one Hercule Poirot. The room was silent, the tension nearly tangible. Edward's expression shifted from confusion to understanding, Margaret's hands tightened in her lap, Clara and Jameson exchanged subtle glances, relieved yet apprehensive. Poirot continued. The act itself, the removal of the tiara, the misdirection, the psychological manipulation, was executed with care. Yet no deception is perfect. The ruby fragment, overlooked in haste, and the diagram, hidden but not destroyed, reveal the entire sequence. The motivations are clear: pride, intellectual curiosity, and the desire to assert oneself over others' perceptions. Philip Fairchild, you orchestrated the events of these past days. Philip's composure broke entirely. It was a test, he admitted quietly, almost shamefully. I did not mean to cause harm. I wished to see, to understand the household, the family. I did not anticipate the fear I would create, the tension. Poirot's eye softened slightly. Curiosity, pride, and intellect are traits that can inspire greatness, monsieur, but when misapplied, they may create chaos and distress. The tiara was never truly lost, it was moved, observed, and handled to provoke awareness. You sought to measure human reactions, and in doing so, you overlooked the truth that even the smallest fragment reveals the whole story. He paused, letting the gravity of the conclusion sink in. The tiara will now be returned to its rightful place, and the household may begin to heal. The lesson, though harsh, is simple: human nature is intricate, observant, and revealing. One may attempt deception, but the smallest detail, gesture, fragment, or hesitation can illuminate the truth. With the revelation complete, Poirot gently retrieved the tiara, now intact, and placed it back in the cabinet, arranging the velvet lining precisely as it had been. The household watched in a mixture of relief and admiration, the tension easing as the mystery resolved before their eyes. Edward rose and extended a hand to Poirot. Monsieur, your brilliance surpasses understanding. You have not only recovered the tiara but revealed the intricate workings of our household in a manner that none of us could have anticipated. Margaret, her composure restored, added softly, Yes, Monsieur Poirot. You have shown us the truth and the wisdom of careful observation, patience, and understanding. Poirot inclined his head gracefully. Ah, Miss Amos, it is not brilliance, but attention, method, and respect for the complexities of the human mind. The little grey cells, patience, and observation, these are the instruments that illuminate the darkness of mystery. Philip, still quietly remorseful, nodded. I understand now, Monsieur Poirot. I overestimated my cleverness and underestimated the subtlety of observation. I am grateful for your guidance and for restoring order. Poirot smiled gently. The truth, monsieur, is always present. One must only observe carefully, with patience and respect. Ravenhurst Manor may now return to calm, and its lessons, though harsh, shall not be forgotten. As the household relaxed, the tension dissipating like morning mist over the gardens, Poirot allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Another mystery had been solved, not merely a theft, but an intricate study of human behavior, pride, and perception. The tiara was restored, the deception revealed, and Ravenhurst Manor could finally breathe freely once more. And as he prepared to retire to his room, Poirot reflected quietly on the elegance and subtlety of human psychology. The puzzle had been intricate, the threads delicate, yet the solution, discovered through careful observation, the tiniest fragment, and the patient reading of human behavior, was as satisfying as it was inevitable. Mon Dieu, he murmured, the mind is the most exquisite jewel of all.